Today, the economic and social horrors of Postcode 2570. Hello again, it's Martin North and John Adams in the interests of the people. And today, John joins me to discuss a very important subject. Hello, John.
Hello, sir. How are you going today?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Not too bad.
Okay.
Not too bad. So we have a very interesting topic to talk about today, and it's all about Postcode 2570, which is in southwest Sydney, which is in the Camden Oran Park area. So there was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald that came out a couple of days ago that really caught my attention. And I thought that, I've been scrambling around talking to various people, and we've been looking at your DFA data set about this postcode, because there was an article that suggests that there's been a massive spike in domestic violence in this postcode, particularly in the last 2 years. And when the Minister Prue Goward, who's the minister responsible for looking at the issue of domestic violence in New South Wales, when she went to the local police and asked, why is this happening in this postcode? The answer from the police was, it is about mortgage stress. So here we are. We've been, particularly in 2018, we talked a lot about the social consequences of bad economic policy, of when you blow up a massive debt bubble, a massive asset bubble. I mean, a lot of the conversation we had last year was talking about what happens when the bubble pops. And we talked a lot about suicide. There's empirical evidence to say that in financial crises, suicide skyrockets. But here is commentary and claims from the police saying that before the bubble pops, there is social horror happening in this particular postcode. And obviously I found that fascinating. So I decided to do a bit of digging around to figure out, how credible are the claims of the police and the minister on this particular point.
So, John, I've always said that you have to get granular, you have to get really into the detail to understand what's going on, because all of the sort of high-level averaging that people talk about all the time misses the point, right? So this is a classic example where, as we delve into detail, we're going to find some quite shocking things. But I think it's also worth saying that this is just one example, just one postcode. Yes. We're not picking out this postcode particularly and saying it's ultra bad, right? This is indicative of what we're seeing also in a number of other places where indeed mortgage stresses are building. But we're going to use this one as a case study.
But the other thing that I think is really important is so obviously on the DFA channel, you talk a lot about 1 million households and mortgage stress. And sometimes it sounds like that you're just talking about bland statistics, but behind the statistics there are real people, real consequences, real life, and according to what the police are saying, there is a very bad social phenomena happening that is happening in this particular postcode.
Yeah, and so what we're really saying is economics and politics and the decisions that are taken have real consequences for real people.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I get the feeling that people forget that.
So there was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald. The title of the article was, "It's Got to Stop, Minister's Final Message for the Men of New South Wales." And we're just going to read a couple of opening paragraphs from the article. The article starts, quote, "When a middle-class, high-employment area such as Camden recorded an almost 50% spike in domestic violence in the 2 years to 2018, Prue Goward, who's the relevant minister, had to ask the question, I spoke to the Camden police. I said, what's this about? They said mortgage stress. It's what tips a bloke over the edge." So that's obviously the police saying that. And this is the minister saying, we have to get much better at understanding an offender instead of always focusing on the poor victim. Here is the police saying to the minister, we've seen a big spike in domestic violence in our local area, and the police say it is about mortgage stress. Given that I've been focusing about economics, the dangers of this debt bubble, the likely economic and social consequences that may come of it, when I just saw this article, it just popped off the page for me, and I think, wow, there is something to sort of dig into here.
And it's worth saying that this postcode is not what you would regard it right at the bottom of the scale in terms of income or other things, right? This is quite a an affluent postcode, relatively speaking, and we'll go into that in more detail. But also, we know that home prices there have been quite accelerated over the last little while, right? So it's pretty expensive to live there and effectively buy a place there. So this is a real, hot meat and potatoes postcode, right? Where right there at the service level, on the ground, mortgage stress is having consequences.
Yes. So having spoken to a couple of locals in this area, particularly who are dealing with women who are affected by domestic violence. I mean, one of the key points they said was that in the last 5 to 10 years, there has been a massive increase in development in terms of real estate development, houses, townhouses, etc. And you've seen a massive influx in this area of new people coming in. So I think the first point to make is that we're going to go through some of the crime statistics that I've been able to pull out from the New South Wales database, but it's not all of you've got an existing population that has just sort of changed its behaviour. So I think there's a combination of that, but also you're seeing a whole bunch of new entrants into this postcode who have moved in with all of these new developments, and people obviously with new developments have borrowed large sums of money to buy these new houses. And according to the police, some of these people who have got way too much debt or who are suffering from rental stress potentially could be, suffering under that stress, and it's leading to social domestic problems. So obviously the first point to go here is that to go look at the claims about the increase in crime. So I went to the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research, and basically looked at their database for this postcode, looking over the last 6 years, and there's some very interesting things to talk about. So the first one is, and we'll put this on the screen, when we look at domestic assault statistics, the way the statistics are shown, you've got a count as to the number of assaults. You've got a rate of crime, the statistical rate, and then you've got the New South Wales rate. Well, from 2013 to 2018, the rate of domestic assaults in this postcode increased by 86.79%, whereas for across the state, the rate actually fell by effectively 0.7%. So crime actually fell in 6 years by a very small margin right across the state of New South Wales, but in this postcode, you had an almost 87% increase in the crime of domestic assaults. So the other category that could point to domestic violence is what the database calls intimidation, stalking, and harassment statistics. So again, I downloaded the data to look at what's happening in this postcode versus what's happening across the state. And we'll put these statistics on the screen. And basically what we can see is that from 2013 to 2018, the increase of crime under this category increased by more than 50%, and yet the New South Wales average just increased by 0.5%. So again, a massive spike in these two categories relative to what has happened right across the state. So obviously there is a social phenomena happening here that sort of justifies the concern that Minister Goward had about what is happening in the Camden Oran Park area. So that's the first part to say, well, does the statistics actually point to a normal level of criminal activity in this area? So we can say yes, it has, based on the data. So the question then becomes what is driving that phenomena? So that's where we had a conversation yesterday, and I said, can you look at your database about what is happening in this postcode? And there was a number of very revealing things that we found.
Sure, yeah, that's right. So the beauty of the DFA dataset, because it goes right down to postcode level, and it has very granular information, we actually were able to pull out some quite interesting and I think quite startling pieces of information. The first one, just by way of context, is the average home price out that way is more than $700,000, right? It's grown a little bit over the last few years, although I've noticed recently that the average values have been starting to fall.
Yes.
And in fact, the fall in values have been quite significant in the last even 2 or 3 months. So we're on a significant turning point with regard to quite a lot of Western Sydney suburbs, including this one, and that comes through in the data set. The second piece of information was to look at mortgage stress. Now, mortgage stress is effectively trying to get at households and how they are coping with making their repayments in the context of their broader household budgets. So on a cash flow basis, is enough money coming in to be able to cover all the outgoings, including the mortgage. The average across the whole country is 31% of borrowing households, and in New South Wales, the average is 32%. So there is a high level of mortgage stress in this postcode, significantly higher than the average. And it's partly, I think, linked to the fact there's been a lot of new building construction over the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of very new purchasers who bought in at the top of the market when prices were right up there. They're now beginning to slide with big mortgages, highly leveraged. And so, not surprising perhaps, mortgage stress is a big deal.
40.7% of households are in mortgage stress. In the postcode, 49% of households are in rental stress compared to the national average of 45.2%. 65 households are at risk of default in terms of their mortgage. 48.15% of households are in negative equity against the national average of 16.45%. So to be honest, when I saw that statistic in particular, that one jumped out to say, if the national average is 16% and yet almost 1 in 2 households in this particular postcode is in negative equity, I mean that should be having massive implications in terms of how people think about their net wealth position.
Yeah, and that's because a lot of people got 90 to 95% mortgages 18 months or 2 years ago, right? And you don't need much on the downside of property values to suddenly find that your property is worth less than the mortgage that you've got. So that, for me, is a very insignificant bellwether number.
Yeah. So a couple of other sort of important things that I think your data was saying was that about 15.6% of households have consumer or payday loans versus the national average of 4.5%. So that's interesting in the fact that payday loans are basically high interest, very short duration type loans. So if people are struggling to pay bills and yet in order to sort of make ends meet, they're getting themselves deeper into debt by getting these payday loans. It's obviously, debt compounding debt. It's sort of leading to, it's sort of, the financial situation of a lot of these houses are unraveling. So I found that statistics to be really interesting as well.
And it's worth saying with payday loans, what's happened over the last 2 or 3 years is that the payday sector has shifted their focus from the Centrelink recipients, which used to be their target, but because of the tighter regulation that came in, they refocused those to people who were a little more affluent but still in financial difficulty, who were particularly more likely to be connected and online. So a lot of the payday loans that are now being offered are actually being offered online to people who are a little bit more affluent but still in significant difficulty, right? So again, not surprising perhaps, but it's another very important leading indicator of difficulty when people are effectively struggling to pay their bills.
I look at a payday loan provider as a loan shark looking for a desperate person. And basically the desperate person used to be poor people on welfare, and now the desperate people are middle class people who have got massive debts and are struggling on a cash flow basis.
Yep, with a property.
Yep. Although the thing is, with a property, although we are saying that in this postcode, nearly of those who are renting, nearly 50% of those who are renting are actually struggling to make ends meet as well. So it is a mortgage stress issue, but your data is also saying there is a massive rental stress issue as well. Yeah. And that makes sense given that rents in this postcode are substantially higher than the medium level of rent right across the state. Mm-hmm. And then obviously the last thing that came out, in terms of your data was that the level of financial education, in terms of do people use a household budget, the level of sophistication when it comes to household finances, you found that to be relatively low in this postcode compared to the state and national average. So perhaps you want to make a comment about how do you measure that in your data methodology?
Sure. So we simply ask them, do they keep a budget? Right? Do they know what they're spending and what they're actually earning? And what that shows is that across the whole of the country, about half of households have no idea. They don't keep a budget, right? The other half do. But in this one, the number was even smaller. So effectively, the number of people who have a really good handle on their finances and know what the money is coming in and the money going out and have a budget for it, is significantly lower in this postcode. And again, that's another, I think, warning sign.
Yep. So obviously the police have made a claim. The crime statistics backs up what the police says. Your data says that effectively what the police are saying, it makes sense. But then obviously, I spoke to a member of parliament, a federal member of parliament today, and we're talking about this particular postcode, not in his electorate, but obviously he found this interesting. He said, well, was there any other factor that was potentially leading to this behaviour other than the economy? Because here you've got the Prime Minister on 7:30 report last night saying that everything's fantastic, strong economy, all of this sort of stuff. We're seeing that in particular postcodes, well, things are far from perfect. So obviously this coalition MP said, well, is there anything else? Is it alcohol? Is it drugs? Is it something else that's leading to this behaviour? So I did have a bit of a look at other crime categories to see, is there anything else at play? And to be honest, there is a sharp increase in drug-related offences in this postcode. So I think to be accurate and to be fair, I thought, look, why don't we present those statistics? So again from the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research, the rate of crime for drug offences from 2013 to 2018 increased by 314%. 2018 saw a slight decline in that rate, but still a relatively sharp rate of increase, and that's against a state average of 38.5% for drug-related crime offences. So we are seeing some big economic phenomena happening in this postcode, but we are seeing something happening around narcotics. Now the thing is that. With some of the stuff, it's kind of like it's the chicken and egg argument. I mean, is it the drugs leading to mismanagement of finances, that leading to mortgage stress, then leading to domestic violence, or is it the economics leading to bad social behaviour, then leading to domestic violence, crime, etc. So I mean, I don't know if you've looked at any causation type of relationships with your data between the economics, household finances, and social behaviour?
Well, the short answer is no. It's very hard to do, right? Because essentially I'm measuring a number of different separate factors, right? But I'm not necessarily measuring correlations between factors. You'd have to do a different type of study, I think, to be able to actually delve into it in more detail to try and actually work out what was the root cause and what followed, right?
Yes.
But what we can say is, here is a bunch of information that is all pointing in the same way.
Yeah.
And you can develop a hypothesis to say, maybe it's something to do with the financial status of those households, which is ultimately leading to a bunch of other bad behaviours.
Yeah, exactly. So whether it's domestic violence, whether it's drugs, etc. But I think we're saying that our core hypothesis is very much what the police are saying, because you think that. Because it's interesting, when I spoke to the service provider, one of the leading service providers in the area, they talk to the victims, and they have a perspective as to what the women are telling them as to what have they gone through. But who are the police talking to? The police are largely talking to the offenders. And so obviously, the police are pointing to the fact that they didn't tell the minister it was drugs. They said that no, it is the economics that are basically tipping certain men over the edge, and this is leading to a whole host of really bad social behaviours that are leading to criminal offences. So that's obviously an interesting point to make. But obviously, so a couple of points when I spoke to this leading service provider. So there is the the Camden Wongadilly Domestic Violence Committee. So it's a sort of key committee in this local community. So I spoke to the chair of that committee, who gets basically a lot of the referrals from the police around domestic violence for this postcode, but also other postcodes in the southwest Sydney area. So basically, they don't necessarily focus on about finances. They largely make sure that the women who are so this is really a women-only service, but they check to make sure that the women are okay from a safety point of view, from a physical point of view. They try to provide various support services so that they can try to get accommodation and all the other sort of relevant services that they need. Some women apparently are saying that money is an issue. And what I was told last night was that money is playing a factor in this, but they couldn't say that the women are saying that the primary cause is because of the finances. But to be honest, they're not asking women, why is this happening in your household? But the interesting, obviously, fact is, the service providers talk to the women, the police talk to the men, and obviously, asking the men, why did you do this? It is somehow the men are telling the police it's because of money. So that's obviously, I think, how the police have come to this judgment that it is the economics that has led to this spike in sort of in terms of domestic violence. So couple of other sort of interesting points to make about what the service providers are thinking. So obviously massive increase in this social phenomena that's happening there. They don't have a lot of resources on the ground. Some women are waiting up to 8 weeks to get counselling services who are going through a horrific situation. And one thing I think it'd be fair to say is, I don't think that, my experience as being both a consultant to government, as a management consultant, but also as a bureaucrat, you always see governments in this country operate in silos. So social services will work in one silo, the police will work in one silo, service providers, third-party independents work in a silo, etc. And yet no one's really sort of taking a holistic approach to actually trying to figure out, well, what's happening in these particular communities and how do we take a holistic approach to it. So it would seem to me that that obviously the police and the service providers are effectively a reaction to an incident. And I don't really have a good handle as to what level of preventive action is being taken to try to resolve these issues. But I think your data is saying that that these things are likely to get worse, obviously, as asset prices fall in this postcode. So the economic what I would call economic horror is going to get worse. One can conclude potentially that the social consequences are going to get worse as well. So there's probably a need for a holistic thinking around how do you address these issues of mortgage stress in particular postcodes so that you don't see more victims coming through the pipeline.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you. And what's really fascinating is that a lot of people still don't believe mortgage stress is real, right? It amazes me, and even on the mainstream media, people just say, I don't see any evidence of it, right? To which I reply, look harder, because the evidence is actually very clear to see. And I think this is a really good example of showing that on the ground, in real households, there are a lot of households who are really finding it very, very difficult at the moment. But the worrying thing for me is that as those home prices continue to slide, as the chances are we're going to see mortgage rates rising ahead, not least because of the out-of-cycle rates that the banks are still going to probably impose at some point because they're still losing margin. This is going to get worse and worse, right? And so you're right, we need a strategy around this, which has to be a combination of education. It has to be a strategy also about financial management, all of those things. And I think we need some joined-up thinking here.
Yes. So I think it's fair to say that what we're seeing now is these factors coming to play in a postcode where there's a whole bunch of new property. And yet, where there are suburbs where there is established property, there is mortgage stress, but it hasn't become acute yet. But with falling house prices, potential rise in interest rates in these more established postcodes, we are going to see a greater level of social consequences play out, and so this could be the canary in the coal mine, and we're going to see more problems manifest right across the community. As this economic Armageddon that I've been talking about starts to play it even further.
Yeah, and let's be clear. There's been a lot of new building there the last few years, right? A lot of new building sites with relatively small plots, quite large properties but very small plots. Not a lot of other infrastructure development around it as well, right? But you can see this same sort of construction going on in multiple locations around most of our major cities. So we should assume that we're going to see similar problems in other areas. And as you say, this isn't just in a traditional old style location, right? This is new development. This is people moving into that new location, and so we must expect to see considerable increases in the same sort of issues as we've seen here elsewhere.
Yes. So to wrap up the conversation, I mean, the name of this channel is In the Interest of the People. Now, part of the frustration I have had, but also something I've been wanting to focus on last year as well as in this year is that there is real consequences when you get economic policy wrong. This is a microcosm of when it goes really wrong. And it comes back to me is, well, if the elite, if the establishment, if the policymakers have neglected in sort of conducting economic policy prudently, well, who is to be held accountable? Because the way society, the media, and the law says, well, it is the perpetrator on the ground who is the offender. And of course, I'm not trying to make excuses for men or women engaged who are perpetrators of domestic violence. But the question is that someone has created an environment that has exacerbated some of these issues, and those individuals, who I would say in the economic establishment, the RBA, APRA, Treasury, the banks, the media, the government, etc., they have created an environment where these things have started to act out and have gotten a lot worse. And I think that to say that group of people shouldn't face some form of accountability for their actions would be, in my view, a massive injustice against the people of this country.
So the question then is, all of these people in the high castles who are making these big macro decisions, right? Do they ever stop to think about the implications for real people on the ground?
I would suspect not. A lot of these people, RBA, Ivory Tower, thing is, like, how many of these people have actually been to this postcode? I mean, you talk about the RBA governor. He's pretty, $1 million a year. He's got a fancy car. He's in the CBD, first class travel, all of that sort of stuff. Has he gone to the ground to look at, to meet people who have been victims of these decisions? I suspect not.
So therefore, in the interest of the people, we need those in authority and with power to wake up and understand what they're doing.
And the only people who will wake them up is the people themselves.
Exactly. Which is why we're here. John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there you have it. Do check back next time for our next episode of In the Interest of the People. I'm Martin North, John Adams. See you next time.